Welcome to Meditation Mount and to this View from the Mount broadcast. It's wonderful to be together again for this session. And as usual, let's begin by taking a few moments to gather our energies and connect to souls. So we do this by taking a few deep, gentle breaths to release any tensions that may be held in our physical body, in our emotional body, our feelings, and in our mind, our mental body. Breathe out any tensions. And now enter the silent space of your heart and become aware of the pulsing of life through your heartbeat. And become aware of the fire of love that burns at the center of your being as the eternal flame. And now we send out beams of lighted love to all those gathered today, and we connect heart to heart to heart. And we see ourselves weaving together a receptive group field in which new insights will arise during our exploration today. So this is the group field that we have created. A group field of communion and community. Thank you. So the theme today is becoming a spiritual first responder. I'd like to begin by reading the announcement that we sent out for this session because it allows us to be conscious of the intent and the content of what we're going to be placing in the field together today. And this is what we said. Whenever natural disasters strike and human tragedies occur, there are teams of first responders providing aid and comfort, as well as skilled hands who can tackle wildfires, rescue people from collapsed buildings, and tend to the wounded at the scene of an accident. There is a real need for those who are equipped to offer spiritual first aid. We will explore the various ways by which it is possible to relieve suffering and aid in the liberation of the human spirit from the prison of earthly attachment. We are living in times of great transition and turmoil as old models of thinking and behaving are found wanting and begin to break apart. In addition to mobilizing our resources to address this breakdown, a spiritual aid worker responds to the urgent call of the soul to generate a new narrative and construct a more just and joyful society that reflects the innate goodness and potential of the human spirit. At Meditation Mount, we are committed to building new and more soul-inspired forms of collective living upon the solid foundation of spiritual principles and values of caring and sharing. Times of emergency, no matter how painful, can also be times of emergence for new shoots of a preferred future. So that's an encapsulation of the territory I'd like us to explore together. So my question is, are we ready to answer the call to be a spiritual first responder? Do we have what it takes? So here's one way of divining the answer. Let me show you this image. If you want to know who is responsible and has the power to build a new world, who is skilled and equipped to become a spiritual first responder, just look in any mirror. I think there comes a time in all of our lives when we realize that it's up to us to become the causal agents of something new. We're not the victims of things perpetrated upon us. As the soul, we are creative powers in our own right. And when we band together, when we join together as a community of souls, we are a potent force for good. So if any of you wondered who we're talking about now, we're just looking in any mirror. So thank you. I think we've conducted the test. So we cover a continuum of needs. There's a spectrum spanning emergency to emergence. So let's begin with emergencies. The recent massive earthquakes in southern Turkey and northern Syria prompted today's theme. Thousands of people died, thousands were injured, thousands were traumatized. So the question is, how do we provide immediate aid and comfort to our sisters and brothers in any part of the world whose lives have been severely disrupted by a natural disaster? So it's one thing to supply the population with food or medicine, shelter, and the other basics of life, and yet who's able to provide the spiritual aid to people who have either lost their lives, lost their possessions, lost their loved ones? So this is where the spiritual first responder comes in. Let me offer a few examples. So during a devastating earthquake, there is a need for immediate support to help rescue those trapped in collapsed buildings, to bury the dead, to tend to the wounded, as well as dealing with the emotional trauma that accompanies such an event. So the spiritual first responder will provide support to those who have died and who, because of the suddenness and shock of the incident, don't fully realize they're dead. And before we address this aspect in more depth, let's look at some of the requirements for becoming a spiritual first responder. Because if we are to help others who are traumatized and bewildered by what is occurring, then we first must ensure that our response to life comes from a place of deep understanding and acceptance, and that all fear has been overcome. It is advisable that we have faced our fears, particularly the fear of death. But fear takes on many forms, and this next image illustrates that. It's the classic example of, it used to be, how do you catch the monkey? By putting peanuts in this narrow-necked jar, and you can put your hand in, grab the peanuts, but you can't withdraw your hand unless you let go of what you're holding. So I'm using this as a classic example of being attached to form. There's nothing wrong with form. It's when we are attached to it and can't let go when it's time to let go. And one of the greatest fears of holding on is that if I let go, I will lose who I am. So the greatest fear, behind all the other fears of losing my possessions, losing my partner, losing my house, losing the physical side of life, is the fear of losing my sense of self, my identity. And that often takes the form of a fear of death, because death is something that is still unknown to us in that respect. So we've been talking about earthquakes, the one that happened recently. And so as a way of illustrating and understanding some of the requirements needed to become a spiritual first responder, let's explore a corresponding spiritual phenomenon that I've called a soulquake. And there's going to be a series of 3 slides on the screen that I will read with you, because this is a process we need to go through ourselves if we're going to be of support to other people. So here's what it says. Many of us live in earthquake country and know at any moment that the earth can move and buckle beneath our feet, causing enormous upheaval in our communities. It constitutes a known yet unpredictable threat to our physical safety and psychological stability, and we have prepared as much as is possible for these geological events. However, in all honesty, are you and I prepared for a soulquake? This life-changing event also causes a great upheaval and change in our lives. A soulquake occurs when we say yes to life. And the desire of the soul to express itself exerts an irresistible and unrelenting pressure on the personality. If this compelling inner force encounters a mental, emotional, and physical body that is not sufficiently integrated and able to gracefully and skillfully respond to its call, then an uncomfortable and unnerving build-up of pressure ensues until it reaches an inevitable breaking point. And then we go on to the second part. Anytime the soul is invoked and meets with resistance or encounters aspects of our personality life that are not in alignment with its deep purpose, it will shake us until we conform to the new requirements. All the unnecessary and outworn parts of our lives will be reconfigured or refined, and in dire circumstances may even be reduced to rubble. A soulquake is a time of great perturbation that clears a space for the new soul-directed life to begin, one that is more in alignment with our essential nature and spiritual purpose. So how do we prepare for a soulquake? And the third slide gives us 3 tips. Here are the 3 tips. In a soulquake, we don't run for cover. We stand in the unshakable stillness and security of the higher self. In a soulquake, we don't hoard or hold on to things. We let go of all baggage, belongings, beliefs, and behaviors that no longer serve us. In a soulquake, we don't practice survival. We enter the fiery crucible of a transformative process that eventually leads to renewal and thrival. And the wrap-up statement is, the gift of a soulquake is that it breaks open a heart that may be encrusted with bitterness or frozen with fear, and it liberates a mind that might be clouded by separative thoughts, so that the beauty and splendor of the indwelling life can reveal more of itself. So that's a very brief recap of a broadcast we did about 1.5 years ago, and also a couple of podcasts on soulquakes. So as we've just seen, a soulquake removes everything that isn't an expression of our inner truth, goodness, and beauty. That's its intent. The reason it shakes us to the core is because it wants to remove all that is the not self. And when you remove the not self, what is left and what is revealed is the true self. Now that takes lifetimes, that takes a whole process. So a soulquake every now and again comes along to shake us loose and make sure that we don't get stuck. But as we just saw, the good news is that a soulquake is a positive upheaval in our lives. Nobody's doing anything to us. We're not the victims of something, because we are the one who invoked the process of transformation that will align us and bring us into deeper resonance with the inner note of our essential nature. And it's the resonance of that note when it resounds through our personal life that causes the necessary upheaval and realignment. So if we are to be reliable and skilled spiritual first responders, then we need to have undergone the training and earned our diploma and our badge. We need to know how to stand in that unshakable stillness when all hell is breaking loose around us. And I say this now not lightly and in jest, but if you look around at the world at the moment, with things that are going on, there needs to be points of stillness and skill, and a spiritual first responder can provide that. So let me share a personal experience that happened over 40 years ago while I was living in the Findhorn community in northern Scotland, because it opened my eyes to the necessity of having skilled spiritual first responders available throughout our communities. So this is the story. I was teaching a course actually on death and dying, and had worked out that it was exactly my 33 and a third birthday that day. And from a numerological standpoint, 33 and a third has to do with the ending of cycles, with death and rebirth. So it was very poignant that I was giving that talk on that day. But during the lunch break, I walked down to the local town to pick up a pair of shoes that were being repaired. And I did that, and I came out of the shoe shop. I stood waiting to cross the road, and then an elderly woman came up, stood next to me. But then suddenly, she stepped out into the road, and a motorcycle came and hit her and sent her flying. And she lay there on the ground bleeding. And the motorcyclist was thrown from his motorbike and was going through agony close by. There was another person in the street at that time who was a local nurse, and she immediately rushed over to the motorcyclist to help him because that was her skill. I immediately knew that I had to be with this woman. So cradled in my arms and bleeding, she died within a few minutes. And my task as a spiritual first responder was to help her leave, to help her understand that she no longer was alive. So my role at that time was not to preserve her earthly form, as she'd already died. And as the accident happened so quickly, the woman was probably in shock and not aware that she was dead. Literally, she didn't know what hit her. And so I spent the next while until the ambulance arrived, holding her, reassuring her that she was safe. Even though she didn't have a physical body anymore, her consciousness remained. She was still alive without a body. And I trusted that this affirmation would help her feel safe. And then I offered, based on my background, my training, I offered some directions on how to let go, to move on, to begin the journey back into the subtle realms. So it's one of those days I'll always remember because death was in the air, not as a morbid cloud hanging over the town, but as a clear reminder of the impermanence of form. Forms are born, they develop, they grow, and then they die at the end of their incarnational cycle. And nowadays we have people who are very skilled at helping others die and transition. For instance, a woman visiting Meditation Mount recently gave me her business card, and I looked at it, and she was a death doula. And her job is to assist with exiting and graceful transitions in a similar fashion that we have midwives who come to help with natural childbirth as a graceful entry into the temporal realm. So this woman was therefore a natural, spiritual first responder. So seeing people sorting through the rubble and pulling the dead and injured who had been buried in the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria reminded me of the need for a global corps of servers, a spiritual first responder team. Take a deep breath, because this is going on all around us. And if we are going to be able to help others, we need to make sure that we're able to stand in a place where we're clear and we're free from fear. Even if we're not there on the ground with them, we can still be of great assistance because, as we've said so many times, energy follows thought, and love travels instantaneously to where it is directed by the compassionate mind. So what I'd like to do right here and now is to take a few moments to direct our particular group psychic and spiritual energy towards those parts of the world where there is tragedy. And let us enter into deep communion with the souls who still may be in shock. They may not know that they have died. They may be in limbo. And we can help them by sending them loving thoughts, because they are our sisters and brothers. Even though they're no longer incarnated, even though they no longer have physical bodies in which they are alive, they're still our sisters and brothers in the one human family, because our human family comprises millions and millions and millions of units of consciousness, and only some of which are incarnated on earth at any one time. So I'd like to take a few minutes for us to offer our love, our compassion, and our reassurance to those stuck in trauma or unknowing in different parts of the world right now as an act of service. So let's re-enter the group heart that we wove together with the fire of love burning at the center. And standing in the power and love of our group heart, we offer and send out the healing salve of compassion and the deep aid of the affirmation that life is eternal while its forms of expression are temporal. So let us send love and compassion to all those who are trapped and who are stuck, whether stuck physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. And we can free them with our love. Maybe we can do this every now and again throughout the day, just to stop for a few moments and just send love to all our sisters and brothers around the world. All those in suffering and shock. I know I'm focusing a lot on death at the moment, but I think it's important to understand that this is a natural gateway, part of the continuous flow of the one life, because very often we only talk about birth. What I'd like to do is to show you this statement. In the continuous pageant of life, through the cyclical procession of the seasons, the angel of endings, or the angel of death, always precedes the spirit of regeneration, so that truth, goodness, and beauty may be born anew and more radiantly revealed at every turn of the spiral. Appearance, disappearance, and reappearance. Such is the generative nature of emergence. So with that, I just wanted to, for me, paint this picture of this continuous flow. Because I know intuitively when there is no fear or doubt present, our soul knows how to leave gracefully, knows how to enter gracefully. So I want to emphasize this because there is a need to realize the deeper dimension to first response. It's the inner work of helping people, either helping them understand what's happening to them now, the shock they've been through, or handling the fact that they're no longer alive. If they're no longer alive, how do you help them return to source? How do you be a useful resource for them as they need to return to source? And in a moment, we can talk about some of the ways that that can be done as a spiritual first responder. Sometimes people are reluctant to dive in because they're concerned about their own safety. But I believe, I have a great faith that when I offer help to someone else and don't think of myself and my own safety, I'm actually protected. because my action is on behalf of the common good. I'm acting as an agent for the good of the whole. So when we help others, we also receive help so that we may provide the needed assistance. So the secret is simply to give, 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 give. And then in the giving, we receive the strength and the power to be of service. And the Tibetan master states in one of the books, service is the greatest healer and teacher. So a spiritual first responder, it's service of the highest order, and serving a higher purpose as well as the true needs of others calls forth the innate goodness of our humanity. So if all of us become spiritual first responders, it calls out the best in us because we are innately good people. And I believe that our task during each incarnation is to create a personality vehicle that can do justice to that fact and that can skillfully honor the radiant presence of the soul on earth. So we're talking about spiritual first response and emergencies and helping people. And as you look around the world, it sort of begs the question, why can't we be kind and caring in the normal course of daily life? Why does it require a tragedy to call forth our better angels and the innate goodness of this human spirit? And for me, it's because we are inside a developmental process as individuals and as nations and haven't yet reached full maturity. So we're not able to fully respond as the soul. So our ability to express the soul openly and lovingly and free from selfishness is actually accelerated through hardship and tragedies. This curriculum speeds up the evolution of consciousness. It's a tough way to learn, but as we've mentioned before, the earth is sometimes called the classroom of hard knocks. And the pedagogical approach of earth is through pain and suffering, and then through this alchemical ritual of daily conscious living, pain and suffering, these base elements are finally transformed into the gold of joy and wisdom. That's a long journey, but we're partway there. We have created some joy, some wisdom, and we still are living with some pain and some suffering. But to the degree that we can liberate ourselves, we can be free to help others. So we go back to, what does it mean to be a spiritual first responder? Because we can perform this duty in different ways, utilizing the power of our thoughts and the compassion of our hearts. We can direct energy. And as we said just now, remember, energy follows thought. We can send our thoughts and our healing balm of compassion to those who are suffering now. And when we do, that's immediate. It touches somebody. It isn't, well, I can do that later, I don't have time. Just taking a few seconds and sending a loving thought to somebody or to an area or a nation has an effect. So this may not necessarily take away physical pain, but it will at the deepest level provide what I call the salve of reassurance from the soul's perspective. Reassurance that everything is okay. So what we're doing by understanding the impermanence of form, we're learning about the continuity of consciousness. And that's important for the spiritual first responder to remember, that the continuity of consciousness doesn't die. It goes through these different transitions. And sometimes we're not aware of that and we get stuck. So we go back to the question of, how do you help people make the transition? How to help people who are stuck? And I know, because I grew up in England, there are lots of haunted houses and stories of ghosts. Sometimes people who are stuck show up in the guise of a ghost. So let's just address that briefly. So this is my rendition. I say a ghost is a person who's lost their body but hasn't realized they're dead and hasn't let go and is therefore still attached to earth. It could be a traumatic incident that happened that locked them, froze them in time and space. So rather than being afraid of a ghost, I have compassion And so one possible role of a spiritual first responder could be, upon meeting a ghost or a soul that's still stuck, is to very gently and lovingly say, maybe it's time to let go. You can't hang around here forever, and actually you've got a ticket booked to somewhere else. Believe it or not, but you're already booked on a flight out of here. So why don't you just let go, get on board, and take that flight home, or whatever words and feelings come to mind. But you're there to help a person let go and to liberate. So I was thinking about this, taking the flight home. And you and I know that when we fly, the airlines always offer in-flight movies. So I was thinking, what if when you and I leave this particular incarnation and are on board the flight home to the subtle realms, there is also an in-flight movie provided? I believe this to be true, not just speculation. But this in-flight movie is one that has you and me in a starring role. Because this in-flight movie on the journey back into the subtle realm is our life review. And we get to look at it, we get to watch it, we get to edit it as we go along. Not edit it to change what happened, but the edits that we provide are the changes to our future responses to similar events. So in this way, as we are watching our in-flight movie, our life review, we begin to create a new narrative. So we're learning our lessons. And this in-flight movie may have periods where it's joyful, and some of the scenes could be painful. But what we're offered is an opportunity to sit back, review, learn, and also to give ourselves some TLC, some tender, loving care and forgiveness. And all the time, we're aided by the kind and caring help of our spiritual guides. So we're not alone on this flight. So this movie acts as a debrief, what in the military they call an after-action review, where 3 questions are asked. What did we intend? What happened? And how can we improve on what we do next time? And I mentioned the Tibetan master just recently. So the Tibetan master is the person who dictated the spiritual teachings to Alice Bailey, and these are part of our lineage here at Meditation Mount. And the Tibetan offers a daily practice to prepare for this in-flight movie, for this life review. So if we are to help others, we need to be prepared and conversant with the process of living and dying, because it represents this continuous cycle of birth and death, whereby the soul gains wisdom through the procession of the seasons, as we just saw on that slide. So the Tibetan calls the process an evening review. It's very simple. So at the end of each day, before you go to bed, just sit down, close your eyes, reflect on the day, going backwards from right now while you're sitting at the end of the day, go back and review every moment to when you woke up. And you review the day from the perspective of the soul. Or some people like to view it from the perspective of a wise and enlightened being. If they come from a religious background, they could view it from the perspective of a Buddha or a Christ. But the main thing is to review it from a detached, enlightened point of witnessing. So the process involves looking at your life in review and assessing, how would I have acted differently if I'd been wiser? And that way you are updating, you're changing the narrative. And it's a non-judgmental way of acknowledging those unskilled actions that we may have performed during the day, so that in future we choose to act in a more skillful and graceful manner. So the Tibetan says by doing this review, we plant seeds of sagacity into the field, and we update our inner narrative and our spiritual response mechanism, and we prepare ourselves through the evening review for the post-incarnational review process, the life review. So I just want to offer that as something that is a good way of practicing so that we can be of assistance to others. And I mentioned in-flight movies, and I was thinking planet Earth sometimes could be looked upon as like a spaceport, and there are souls arriving and departing all the time. And at this spaceport, there are always people to help you when you check in and when you check out. And I can see the spiritual first responder, you and I, if we sign up, we can become like gate agents at the spaceport, and we advise people if they're checked out or if they're checking in. And I can imagine a scenario where you're checking in, and as the gate agent, we say, "Welcome to Earth. Here are your parents. They're going to take care of you until you can stand on your own feet." And for those whose time it is to depart, they're ready to leave, the gate agent may say, "Have a safe flight home, enjoy the in-flight movie," whatever. I know I'm being a little flippant, but we have to hold this lightly because this is life. And the other thing for those departing on the flight back is always good to remind them. The good news is when you arrive back in the subtle realms, there's going to be an amazing reception committee because all your friends will be waiting to welcome you back. And that's an interesting contrast between birth and death. The Tibetan, once again, says birth is a lonelier time than death, because when we arrive, we're packaged in the skin encapsulated ego, this tiny capsule that we live inside for a while. And during those early years, we don't have the capacity to speak or make ourselves known and to make sense of the world. We're still landing, and therefore it can be a time of estrangement as we're still arriving from source into this temporal world. And so a spiritual first responder or a parent can reassure the soul. You've landed. You're safe. Here you are. We're going to do this together. And when you're old enough to stand on your own 2 feet, off you go, but we'll always be there to support you. So you don't have to be a spiritual first responder with a uniform. You can become a spiritual first responder through any role, anywhere, at any time. So we're part of a continuous cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, as I've just mentioned. Life enters earthly existence through the white hole of birth and leaves through the black hole of death. And this is where I want to just go back and we have this procession again. I want to repeat this slide because it really is helping us understand. In the continuous pageant of life through the cyclical procession of the seasons, the angel of death always precedes the spirit of regeneration, so that truth, goodness, and beauty may be born anew and more radiantly revealed at any turn, or every turn of the spiral. Appearance, disappearance, and reappearance. Such is the generative nature of emergence. I guess that's really what we're learning. We're learning what it means to be alive, what it means to be present, to be mindful. So as spiritual first responders, we carry out the aid work with love, with wisdom, with compassion and skill. I would say that a spiritual first responder models loving wisdom in action. So if you want to earn your badge and become a spiritual first responder, you and I first have to look at our own life and our relationship with our soul, our relationship with our personality. Because if we don't have a clean and clear relationship with death, with life, with ourselves, with where we're at in the process, it's difficult to help other people. Because if I am trapped in a pattern or a trauma, even though I wish to help, I can inadvertently transfer more pain to that person. So as a spiritual first responder, I find it useful each day to declare, this is a good day to live. This is a good day to die. In that way, we make it good. It's a good day every day because by living it as if it were our first and living it as if it were our last, we learn to become present. And a spiritual first responder, the requirement is to be present, to be mindful, and to be prepared. So the reason I moved to address this theme today is because tragedy brings death knocking on our own door. And if we're afraid of death and hide from it, or simply say it's the cessation of form and nothing exists beyond that, then we're not able to truly help the people move beyond form, because we don't understand it's the continuation of life and consciousness. So when you think of how to help people transition, there are many traditions that have this practice, and they help create a peaceful atmosphere for those departing. The Buddhists have a wonderful process of how to sit with and accompany somebody as they travel the 40 days through the Bardo. And the Jewish tradition has a practice of sitting Shiva. So this is a way, as a community, we can hold people in their thoughts as they die. So when I know a good friend of mine has died, or somebody who's a friend of a friend, I thank them for their life, their gifts, and trust they'll have a safe journey back, and wish them well. And if I feel that I need to follow them, I may follow them for a few weeks by just pulsing love. What I don't do, though, is say, oh dear, why did you have to die? Why did you have to leave me? I don't want to put an anchor on their leg when they're trying to leave here and lighten up and be able to be free of the form. So when people die, the best thing we can do is to celebrate their life. So I'm thinking that when you and I travel on Earth, we usually pack a suitcase or a backpack and off we go traveling. But when we die, it's the only journey for which we have to unpack. No heavy bags or old baggage is allowed on this flight. So when it's time to leave, we are advised by the spiritual teachings to let go of earthly things with gratitude, and basically to travel naked. We arrive naked and we will leave naked. And it's only during the in-between time of birth and death that we tend to dress up in a variety of colors and costumes to play our part in the grand psychodrama of life being staged on Earth. So the spiritual first responder embraces the full spectrum of life from emergency to emergence, and seeks to support this whole range of needs. So we've been talking about tragedies and emergencies. I'd like to shift now into the spiritual first responder responding to the emergent life of the planet. And in this instance, we're being called and being asked to respond to the call of the soul of our own individual soul, the call of the soul of humanity, and ultimately the call of the soul of the planet. Because inside the soul of the planet is held the promise and destiny of that life. And if we're going to be here to aid in its revelation, we have to be skilled at responding to the deeper call of life. Because we're being asked to imagine and craft a new world based on soul qualities and spiritual principles. We're being asked to build a new society founded upon caring and sharing, one that manifests this innate goodness of the human spirit. And at Meditation Mount, our mission is to promulgate and live the principles and pathways of the realm of the soul, because they're the foundation upon which to imagine and precipitate a preferred future in the soil of today. I know we've mentioned these principles before, but I want to name them again in this context. The three principles are the principle of essential divinity. This says that inside of you and I is a spark of the Creator, an aspect of that eternal flame. Therefore, you and I are fractals of this one life. You and I are sacred. All life is sacred and needs to be respected and honored and celebrated. And then the second principle is the principle of goodwill. And that has to do with love. Goodwill is basically love in action. And love is the lifeblood of all relationship. Lifeblood of love. Because love is the true currency. It's how we value. We can't value relationships in monetary terms. It's the amount of love that flows through and between and among people. And then the third principle is the principle of unanimity, which is a deep understanding that all life hangs together as one seamless web of life. So the reason that we work with these principles is that we believe that when you live the reality of essential divinity, when you live the reality of love in action as goodwill, and when you live the reality of that we are part of a multidimensional, interdependent ecosystem through the principle of unanimity, that is the most solid foundation upon which we can build a new world. If we try to build a new world based on the current foundation, it'll crumble again, because the current foundation is corrupt. That means it doesn't truly support the needs of the whole. And then at Meditation Mount, we work with 3 pathways. And I want to name these because the pathways lead into our ability to embody the principles. So for instance, there's a pathway called spiritual approach. And spiritual approach leads to a realization of essential divinity. Now, spiritual approach doesn't mean religion. It could be philosophy, it could be religion, it could just be music, science, anything. It's anything that deepens our relationship with our essential self. And then there's the pathway of right human relations. And we say that this leads to the activation of goodwill. So right human relations is when I come into harmony with myself, with my fellow sisters and brothers, with my human family, but also when I come into right relationship with all life on earth. It's not just among and between humans. And when we come into right relationship, we understand that the glue that holds us together is love. And once we get that, love can flow, goodwill can be present on earth. And the third pathway is called group endeavor. And group endeavor is how we experience unanimity, the principle of unanimity. Because when we start working together as a group, we realize that we are part of this integral experience. We are integral aspects of one life. And so as we work together and share and care and build, we have on a microcosmic level this experience of unanimity. So the task of birthing a new way of living together on earth is that we create a way of living that is in harmony with all life. And I believe that this is the specific call at this time from the soul. So as a spiritual first responder, in addition to the emergencies and the tragedies, a really important call that we have to respond to all the time is from the soul of our one humanity, from the soul of our planet. And you can see with the fires of destruction presently burning, and they're burning the old and worn out forms that no longer serve the good of the whole, we can see that the new is like the phoenix arising from the ashes of the old world. And I would say that a spiritual first responder is an active member of the forces of reconstruction. So it goes back to appearance, disappearance, reappearance. So the reappearance of life is a reconstruction, a revealing. So we're part of the forces of reconstruction in order to help. And it is a group endeavor. And there are certain requirements that have to be met. So I'd like to show another slide that illustrates what I believe is needed for something truly new to be birthed on earth. Let me read this and unpack it with you. Purity of intent and purity of heart are required for the birth of a new consciousness. Purity of intent calls forth the fiery seed of purpose that carries the eternal promise of life enfolded within its center. This goes back to the image we've used before of the seed containing the promise of the future, but nothing happens with that promise until it's planted in the soil. So what is the soil? Well, purity of heart opens the virgin space of unconditional love that forms the womb of creation and allows for the unfolding of the yet to be revealed promise. So this is something we've touched on before with the seed and the soil. The seed holds the promise, the soil holds the opportunity of revelation sequentially through the seasons. And also, I've touched on this before, that space, pure space, is the feminine aspect. It's the mother. And then when we talk about the mystery of the virgin birth, without going too deep into this particular mystery, I want to say for me, the virgin birth is creating an uncontaminated field, a field that is pure as is possible. So nothing from the past, no patterns from the old thinking and behaving are coming to contaminate the new. So a virgin birth is this pure field that allows the promise of the future to be born without distortion. I just offer that as a way of holding the act of being co-creators of a new world. We have to do it with purity of intent and make sure our intention is lined up with a higher purpose, and the purity of heart, so we're not doing anything for selfish reasons or self-serving reasons. So purity of intent and purity of heart for me is the insurance policy of a life. I don't know what's going to happen to me on the physical plane. I have no idea. But I know that with purity of intent and purity of heart, that is the only spiritual insurance policy that I can take out. So I wanted to just offer this particular exploration. So here at Meditation Mount, we also work with what's called creative meditation. And creative meditation is the art and science by which we fashion the dreams of a new world. So it's a group meditation practice to actually design the inner spiritual architecture from which to construct the new outer forms. Just if I'm going to build a house, I go to an architect with, hey, this is what I want, this is what I've got in mind, and they create the architectural drawings, and then we find a contractor, and then we do the building. So creative meditation is a way for us to become co-creative partners with this whole multidimensional ecosystem of lives that constitute the incarnating planetary life. So we're not just creating a new world for us. We are part of the planet itself, giving birth to a new iteration of itself. It's what is referred to in some religious texts as heaven and earth coming together, being merged and married. And without going into too much detail, because you can go to meditationmount.org, our website, and you can go to the drop-down menu and look at creative meditation, and there's more information on that. But one of the things you'll see in the toolbox is imagination, visualization. But imagination is key in this process, because imagination is like a mercurial bridge connecting the eternal realm of cosmic ideation, which is the dream and deep desire of the Creator, with the temporal world of manifested forms. We need to keep this bridge open and life flowing across the bridge so that the ideal can be made real. It can be realized in time and space. So as far as creative meditation is concerned, you could say that a spiritual first responder is an active and co-creative agent of the one life. We are practicing creative meditation every time that we send out positive thoughts, we send out images of a better future, a more joyful, a more just future. We are saturating the ethers with new possibilities. And broadcasting the seeds of new possibilities is one of the tasks of a spiritual first responder, because we're responding to the soul, and the soul is sowing its light and its love and its wisdom into the earthly field constantly. And it's said that the soul is in constant meditation 24/7. And therefore, we use meditation as a way of coming online with our soul. And a spiritual first responder is soul-centered. So when we show up in this way, we become points of entry for new life to flow into Earth. We become portals and seed points of creativity. And the following slide illustrates this. And it says here, and you can probably see yourself, the points of entry on Earth through which genius can flow are those groups and individuals who are open to meet the need, and through the quality of their lives act as magnetic seed points, act as gateways. Remember, the gateway, the white hole, is a gateway which light enters Earth. And when forms are ready to disappear, they disappear through the gateway of death, which is the black hole. So I wanted to illustrate that spiritual first responders form a network of points of entry for light into the Earth. This part of the greater reimagination of the planet, the reimagination of society. So I'd like to say here, by way of a disclaimer, look, I'm not here to convince anybody about anything anymore. I'm done with that. You don't have to believe anything I've said, but I would invite you to at least consider it as a possibility. Consider that your soul is timeless, and that your soul cycles through seasons of birth and death to carry out its preordained and destined role in the greater scheme of things. And if you don't want to believe this, you can always test it out yourself. You can test it out and test this working hypothesis in the laboratory of your own daily life. Because some people want empirical proof. Well, test it out yourself. Maybe go for a day, go for a week by acting out of love, acting out of compassion, acting as a spiritual first responder, acting as if I am the soul on Earth. See what difference it makes to your life, to the field around you. So I'm giving you this disclaimer because what I'm really doing is presenting what's been given to us throughout the ages. That's why it's called the Ageless Wisdom Teaching. It's this flame, this torch that's been passed like an Olympic torch from civilization to civilization. And each time, each civilization gives it its own interpretation, gives it its own coloring. And so what we have at the moment is the Ageless Wisdom Teaching coming through, whether it's the Theosophical Society, Krishnamurti, Steiner, the Alice Bailey materials. They all give us an insight into the ageless wisdom, which really is the wisdom of the soul. So I'd like to just complete our time together by offering this final slide as a recap. It's really with how we started. It says, what is world service, or what does it mean to be a spiritual first responder? Is it to patch up the old, or is it to help the new grow? Well, it's both. But when we say patch up the old, it's to relieve the pain and suffering of life. It's not to preserve forms that are outdated and need to dissolve and disappear. And we've just seen that it is to help the new grow, whether it's through creative meditation, acts of loving kindness, just living a life that is good, living the good life. So being a spiritual first responder is simply living as the soul. So in closing, I invite each of us, if you're willing, to learn the required skills of being a spiritual first responder, because as the old world is breaking up before our eyes here now, this aid service is going to be needed now more than ever before. So little bit of a request. Please sign up. Become a spiritual first responder, but do it joyfully, because we're going to be on call 24/7 to help with a constant regeneration of life as we journey together upon this virtuous upward spiral of evolution aboard our beloved Earth as one human family. That's the journey we're on. That's what we're responding to. It's the call of life. That's what it means to be a spiritual first responder. So thank you for your presence and your participation today. Oh, just by the way, we'll be skipping a month, so our next View from the Mount broadcast will be held on April the 16th. So I know we've got a lot to digest. I would invite you just to take this to heart, because the world needs the love and the caring that live inside our heart to be offered at this time of transition, at this time when we are moving from pain and suffering to the joy and wisdom of a new day. So thank you again, and good night, and blessings from all of us at Meditation Mount. Namaste.